Hello, and welcome to the latest in the Earn, Learn, Thrive LinkedIn Lives. And I'm really excited today to be talking to Meri who is better known perhaps on Instagram and even on LinkedIn as the non-native speaker. Now, that in itself is a bit of a something that we're going to talk about is terminology, I think. But to start with, Meri, would you like to just tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your work as a teacher, as a trainer, as a blogger, and
Sure.
how you came to be talking to me?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me in the first place. And yes, well, I've started teaching English 14 years ago for business companies. Really, that's how I began my journey in the ELT field. And I was not qualified to teach. Let's put it this way. And I was hired by a language school to teach English, and I just, jumped at the opportunity to begin. And I'm based in Italy. After that experience, during that experience, I sought formal training. I did a CELTA and I did a Delta, which I completed in 2018. And I have an MA in linguistics and language studies, and I currently teach in an international school, English as an L2 language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Lovely.
yes. And to answer, it's a kind of a long story. I am originally from Armenia. So I was born in Armenia from Armenian parents. But I immigrated with my family when I was 6 or 7 years old. So English kind of became my first language, my dominant language, at the age of 8. And I studied it in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. And so I never really sought a career in teaching languages just because I spoke 4 languages by the age of 14, and I didn't think I'd make it into a career or study more languages.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to become a journalist, actually. So I did that, and later, at a later stage, did I decide, okay, this is something that I would love to do, actually, because it's something that really, really I really enjoy doing. I love teaching, and that has become my career so far.
Yes, it's easy to get the bug, isn't it? I had no intention of becoming a teacher either until I tried it.
Yes. The profession kind of calls you at a certain stage. Yes,
Yeah,
you
I
just
think
answer
so.
the call.
So tell us a bit as to call yourself the non-native. So tell us a bit about what that's about, and why that's important.
Well, I think like the majority of the teachers going to the field, I wasn't quite aware of, this dichotomy between native speakers, non-native speakers, and teachers, etc. So it actually came at a later stage, I would say, in my teaching career. So when I was asked to teach the first time, I immediately said, I was hired over the phone. I immediately said, well, I'm not a teacher. So how am I going to go into a company, teach a company course, business English to people when I haven't, got the qualifications? And that was my initial idea about, that's the figure I saw as, teachers should be formed professionals. So I never thought that I could kind of improvise my way in this career. But when that happened, at first I didn't question it. I just thought, okay, that's great. I get to be this, I get to have this prestigious career, and no one is going to question, my credentials, because I am, in fact, I'm leaning on the language school to
Mm.
provide all the necessary details. But the red alert started ringing. The alarm bell started to go when I was asked not to say that I was in fact from Armenia, and just to speak my way out of any kind of problem or controversy or controversial topic that might
Mhm.
arise, and just say, I've lived in America for such a long time, and really I lived in the States for about 9 months with my family when I was, a child. So
Mm.
that wasn't the case. And so flash forward to 2018, I felt that I had finally grown to, when I initially loved the job, and then when I sought formal training, I thought this is really the way to go. I really like this. And I thought that by building on this career, I would get better job opportunities. And I thought, I would be finally respected and have respect for myself as a teacher. I'm not some sort of a fraud, going around speaking, my fluent English, and everyone just nodding their head and saying, "You have a wonderful accent. I want to sound like you." So that really stopped when I did get my Delta, and I was kind of called to by a private language school to go and test out a course at a B2 level for university students trying to prepare the IELTS. And the person who was the supervisor just looked at my CV, what she hadn't looked at before, and she just said, "No, you're not the profile we're looking for, and there has been a mistake." And she refused. I had gone into the interview speaking in Italian, and she thought I was Italian, and she just refused to speak in English to me. And I started with, I was trying to persist and get English out, and she just said, I said, I could do a trial lesson if you would like, if you don't trust, my capabilities as a teacher. And she just wouldn't have it. And I walked out of that interview. I called the language school who had, gotten me the interview, and they apologized, and they, in fact, confirmed that I wasn't getting this opportunity because I was a non-native speaker. And so at that stage, I think my confidence level had gotten to a point where I really trusted my skills and my knowledge of the language, and I felt very confident. Having designed a course for Module 3 in the Delta, like I really wanted to put that into practice. But I just thought, okay, this is definitely, I feel confident enough to say that this is really discriminatory. And I cannot believe that I was not even allowed to open my mouth and speak in English just because my nationality prevented me from, having access to that type of role. And so that day on the bus ride back home, I decided, okay, this is how I'm going to, I shouldn't be ashamed of who I am and that I'm not an English speaker per se, like born into this identity. But I'm going to just call myself that openly and say, well, I am, the walking advertisement of the fact that you can, in fact, be an English teacher no matter where you're from. And you're not born into an occupation. And so I started all this about a year and a half ago when I finally completed my MA in languages. And I thought, okay, this is going to be my call. And I'm just going to, go hard on this topic because it's not outdated. It's something that happens all along. It still happens. And I still see ads in Italy seeking native speakers and not qualified teachers.
Absolutely. Because, the title of our live today was like, is being a non-native speaker teacher really a problem in 2023? And it was you that suggested this. And I think, there is more awareness than there was for sure. But all the stories that I hear all the time tell me that there absolutely still is a problem. And so, I think the way that you came to my attention on Instagram because of the way that you were dealing with this kind of head on. And I don't mean by that, it's aggressive or scary or, all of these things, which I think can sometimes be an issue when we're calling out inequalities. People start to get a bit defensive and this kind of thing. But it's good, I think, to just kind of put it on the table, if you like.
Yes. And I have to add to that, I don't have anything against native speakers or native English teachers. Absolutely not, because I feel that there is now this bias against, my personal, let's say, behavior and, even the private encounters that I have with people who are, oh my gosh, you're the non-native speaker. And I feel that, I don't feel I'm aggressive in the way that I treat these, these inequalities. I just feel that it's not only that, it's not important that we need to raise awareness on this, but we have to act upon it. And when native speakers, I get angry when they say, the issue is not even there, or it's such an outdated term. Like, why would you be? I feel like what it does is just, it disempowers those people who are kind of trying to find their voice and claim their identities. And the fact that the world now is not, English does not belong to an elite group of English speakers, and we're all using it. And in a way, we are acting like a minority when we are, the majority of English teachers.
Absolutely, yes.
And what gets me cross is that, English speakers sometimes they advertise their skills, and knowing that there is this bias in the system, they claim under competencies or under skills they put native speaker, because they know at the end of the day that that's going to get them far. And I know this for a fact because I've seen CVs that claim, that is a selling point for them. And they know very well what they're doing, and that's what makes me kind of, question their intentions when they do this, because they should be raising more awareness on this and saying, I have certain or so and so qualification, and that's what makes me a good teacher, and not just base it off their passports or their nationalities or their birth.
Absolutely. I mean, either way, ultimately it's about competence as a teacher. So, English is my first language, and that's, I'm sure, helped me a lot along the way, but it doesn't make me a good teacher.
Of course.
It's the training and the experience that I have.
I have to say that I find myself in the privileged group as well, because having English as my dominant language, I now speak a lot about, polyglots and bilingualism, and it's just not set in stone that you should be proficient and very well educated in just one language. The reality is that there are many people who are bilingual in the current world. So this idea of just putting people in boxes and saying, you are Italian, so Italian should be your strongest or your dominant language, and you're English, so you're supposed to be. It's not a given. And if we do those proficiency tests that sometimes we give to our students, we realize that maybe we don't, get a C2 across all skills ourselves as native speakers or teachers sometimes. So, it's really, there is a fine line between these perceptions that we have of each other, of ourselves, and then what we expect also of our students, right? So
no, absolutely. I'm just looking in the comments, and thank you everybody who said hello, and please do add any comments or questions. I'm just looking at Rachel's question here. So Rachel's saying there's been a lot of research around the specific well-being issues of, quote, non-native teachers. L2 teachers can bring so much to the profession. Language is culture, after all. We need to continually enrich our culture and enrich our language.
Yes, definitely. I agree with this. And also L2 teachers, sometimes when we go into L1, I teach in international school. So when I go to, the English section where English is supposed to be the L1, I find this mixture of backgrounds and ethnicities and colors and everything so diverse and so enriching, in fact. However, they're all categorized under this group, and more often than not, language is not taught as a second language, when in fact for most people it is. So I live, I bring this example, I live in Italy, and when you're in an international school, sometimes people tend to avoid or not even mention the town that they're in or the city that they're in, simply because they live in this bubble where they don't want to consider that other languages are influencing the kids in this school. And so often I find, even in a secondary school setting, that they need to really go back to, studying grammar, studying, the language. So L2 teachers are definitely very much sought, and they are needed for these kids because they have so many languages in their backgrounds. They need to kind of hone their skills in those areas that, we kind of take pride in. Okay, we're an English section, so we don't need to be studying English because we speak English already. And then, you can imagine the how the conversation would continue there.
Well, it's about valuing all the languages, and you're right. In many cases, there will be, a huge variety of different languages that people speak to different degrees. It's not a simple kind of dichotomy, as the word that you used, which is how it's often seen at all. And of course there are L1 speaker teachers who have virtually no understanding of how English works, right up to those who are extremely qualified and understand the language very well and maybe speak several other languages, so there's a huge difference.
And
there.
Therefore, you shouldn't add, like sometimes it's not sometimes, actually the Ministry of Education in Italy seeks exclusively native speaker teachers to be teaching that. It obviously stems from the fact that, public schools don't have a very good reputation of offering a good level, of prepared teachers of English. So it comes from that, but we know for a fact that that's not how the story really goes, because if you're seeking to find a professional teacher, then you can't just base it off looking for native speaker as the exclusive criteria, first and foremost, most important thing, and then look at their qualifications. So hopefully that will change. As we were saying before we started the live, and I'm not afraid to say it here, I think the Italian system is very behind in terms of addressing these unequal, treatments that they give to speakers of other languages who are English language teachers. So we really have to, I think, not be scared to confront that status and say, okay, why is it? Because the European law kind of recognized it already, and we have also in the CEFR descriptors changed a lot of these wordings that were, you need to be, you're a C2 level if you can comprehend native speaker level speakers of English. So that has been changed. So obviously some, let's say, some things were not definitely working in the system and also in the descriptors, and we have acknowledged that. But now we have to back that up with some action and provide the same type of opportunities. And another question all on its own is, how teachers are treated in Southeast Asia, and, the teacher programs that there are set for people who are, just freshly graduates that can kind of go to a foreign country and just go into an assistant program for teaching without having any qualifications, any sort of background.
I mean, I think, things have definitely, I've been in ELT for 30 years now, and things have definitely changed. Maybe it's better to say things are changing, because I don't think we've reached a point of like, that's it, we're sorted now. It's a bit like feminism, really. Things are definitely done, but there's still quite a long way to go. And I think, maybe I do see quite a lot of people like pitting themselves against each other and blaming, so it's the fault of the students, it's the fault of the school owners, it's the fault of the native speaker and I think there's probably some truth in all of that. But how do you think we go forward with this?
I want to answer that question by reading one of the comments that we got here. And it says here, I think both can complement each other, by Mohammed. It says, native speakers offer great models of fluency and ease of communication. So per that definition, saying that native speakers offer great models of communication because they have this ease and fluency, don't I have that? This is how we should be moving forward. Because I call myself provocatively the non-native speaker to make a point, and that is, it's not how we complement each other, it's how we coexist without complementing each other, because we are enough. A native speaker qualified teacher is enough on their own, and so is a non-native English teacher. In Italy, when you teach English in the public school, you really have to have gone through a lot of training. And the idea that because of this kind of thought process, yes, having people come from England, let's say, and be a reader or someone who offers the correct model of pronunciation is something that really is detrimental to the teaching profession. Because someone who has invested 5 years of their time, their effort, their money into getting a qualification as an English teacher definitely is enough also as a model, or should be enough, should I say, as a model of pronunciation for her or his students. It's not that type of working together that we should be seeking out. because that just confirms that you still think that non-native English teachers are not apt to teach by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, Mohammed's actually agreeing with you here. And Katrina's saying, as a native speaker, I'm not a role model for my students. I've never had to do what they're doing.
That as well, but you don't have to be. I mean, it's definitely a selling point also for, there's this imposter syndrome that as non-native English teachers, we all have, and I've had for a very long time, thinking I'm not good enough. With my story that I said, until I reached the Delta, which I had kind of fixed in my mind that it was the best thing I could have gotten for myself. Until I got to that level, I didn't feel confident in my teaching. I don't think the Delta has given me superpowers. It hasn't. It just built my confidence enough to question this bias system or this bias in the system. So, I don't think as teachers we should be talking down to ourselves and saying, oh, I'm just a monolingual teacher. Or as long as you have, I think, put effort and you care about your students' progress in the language, and as a teacher you've studied all the areas of that are your competence and that are going to help your students achieve their goals, then you're fine. I don't think that we should be saying this is better or this is worse and this person is more prepared. So because I speak 4 languages, then I'm the best teacher because I've done it so many times. No, I think that the market is so dense with a lot of people who are seeking to learn English, that there is a place for everyone to be teaching and doing their best work. And someone might seek me as a teacher because they would have, let's say, the experience of having an Italian student, for instance, might benefit from having me as their teacher because I could help them, as I've studied Italian as well. I'm bilingual. But some Italian student might want to have the full, let's say,
immersion.
Yes, and not that I can't offer the full immersion myself. I can forget my Italian and not use it. And that's another thing. One of my contacts on Instagram said, his school forced him to only speak in English with the students, and so he did because he's new at the job, even though he realized that this is not the way to go. Like, why should we pretend we don't have other tools in our box that we can use to kind of get to our students, or kind of make it a bit faster for them to realize what they're doing wrong or how we can help them? What's the shame in that?
That's ridiculous. I mean, it comes from I was a CELTA tutor for many years, and that course was developed in London. And so if you have a group of multilingual learners and you only speak one of the languages, then I think it makes some sense that you wouldn't make a big deal about the fact that you speak one of the languages, because you're kind of excluding everybody else. But if you're working with a monolingual group in that country, it's totally ridiculous that you wouldn't use that language if you know it, because you've got insights, that can be helpful. I mean, it's taking something which kind of made sense in a certain context and then making it a rule, and that you're a bad teacher if you don't do it. It's nonsense, I think.
Yes, and like in my context, again, strangely, we pretend sometimes that even French, in the French section, people don't speak Italian. They do. So you can absolutely, also in multilingual groups, sometimes they have one other language in common that is not English. And so you can absolutely make that into also a lesson and kind of include them, even though I don't speak French, but I can ask someone, how do you say that in French?
Yes.
And it brings about, your kind of validating their experience, their language as well, and their identity and their background. And it's helping maybe someone who is not so good also in, I don't think that languages are exclusive, just to each other. I think it just being taking the linguistical approach, you can do a lot with even just one language, but you can also validate other minority, let's say, languages within the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can get people to talk about their language and how it works compared with English, even if you don't speak it at all and nobody else does. in the
Yes,
class, it's
yes,
still
yes.
valid, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
so important. I'm going to do a little promo here because I'm going to talk to Ian on LinkedIn on this as well, on culture and language and how they're
Mm.
intertwined, and how sometimes, the context, where you are teaching culture and where you're teaching the language has everything to do, with how you're teaching the language.
Mm. Yes, no, I spotted that. So we'll put the link into the comments, and I'll put it into the newsletter that I write as well.
Thank you.
You mentioned something that, interests me particularly, because I do quite a lot of work on mindset with the teachers that I work with. You mentioned like imposter syndrome. And I think this is something that everybody suffers from to a degree, because, it's natural, I think. But people often see imposter syndrome as a kind of, like a personality flaw, if you like. And I think it's important to say that it's something that's created by what messages you receive.
Absolutely.
So, there's a reason why women tend to experience it more than men. And there's a reason, I would say, why probably non-native speaker teachers experience it more than native speakers, because people are constantly telling them
Mhm.
that they're not as good.
Yes.
So you're going to internalize some of that for sure.
Course, I don't think you can avoid even thinking about this problem. Yes, it's so present there. It's definitely something we have to reflect on and be kinder to ourselves as teachers, as professionals, because I really do think that, it's more. Uh, it's a lot of work that you have to do on yourself, because every person's level of confidence depends on a variety of factors. So whatever gives you that external validation that you need to be having, let's say, to
Mm,
be at that better level, or that you feel that you are apt to teach, and then you can go ahead and, what I do, I think sometimes is seen as very brave, but I don't, because I question this
mm,
narrative that has been put in place by a lot of people, and for so many, for various decades. But at the end, I don't think I'm that brave, in a sense that I think that it's enough just to uh, put that question, like be more inquisitive about why there is this negative perception,
mm,
even though maybe you don't feel that you're at your highest level or at your highest point. But you can start identifying those moments where your culture or your identity are lessened by a colleague or someone who is working alongside you, or
mm,
by an ad, and just say, okay, but where does that leave me?
mm.
You know? um,
Well,
and
and question it, as you say. you
yes,
know, does that actually make sense? Because a lot of the time it really doesn't.
it really does.
Or as I was saying, when we were talking about the monolingual, multilingual thing, it's based on something that actually isn't even relevant. All of this talk about how students want native speaker teachers. Well, that's because they were marketed to for decades
Yes.
by people who were running language schools with native speakers who were not that qualified and were happy to work for peanuts.
Yes.
So it kind of it all goes back, to these things which actually don't have a basis in real, what we really know about how languages are learned.
I think there's no other occupation, maybe I'm wrong, but that kind of is so triggering and is only for people who are, from a certain nationality or from a specific background. If
Mm,
you're a doctor and you're a doctor in whichever country, you're still like a respected
mm,
figure. And the fact that this is just, for this is a question of the ownership really of the language, and
mm,
people feel so, when I speak to colleagues about this, they always say, yes, but I've interviewed, a lot of non-native, and their pronunciation was horrible. I could have never, hired them. And you really need to interview people to. I say the same goes for native speaker teachers, because I think that some accents are unintelligible. And
mm,
so, it can work both ways. I don't think you have to, you can put it in that category, let's say, of I'm just going to go up because the student is going to have the excellent pronunciation level. And when speaking about this dichotomy, more often than not, pronunciation comes up. Pronunciation.
But again, you know, that is all about how we perceive it, because what makes a nice accent or not, you know, what it, and often this comes, I mean, it's past and we're getting into something even bigger, but but you know, often this is about class and things. You know,
Yes.
it's like, do you have like a, you know, a posh Southern English accent? And if not, then is it a horrible accent? You know, I mean, it oh, there's so much to unpack here.
Yes.
It's a shame we're running out of time.
A day, a week, a month isn't enough, because the more you delve into it, I think, like other subjects that are so relevant arise. Because at the end, what is language? I think language is the closest element that comes to really our identity. And we take pride in our identity and how we speak languages. Culture comes into play. It's definitely, you know, something for humanistic studies, you know, philosophies and cultures of identity. I mean, everything is really intertwined with this topic. So it just unpacks. There's a lot of unpacking to do to realize why we say the things we say, or why do we expect certain attributes from certain people, when in fact, you know, these things, these attributes are only had when you put yourself through formal training. And I do really, really believe in formal training. Even though, yeah, titles are not everything in a person's life and career. Definitely experience plays a very important part. But and I'm sorry I'm stressing this again, I don't believe that simply because you've spoken one language since you were born makes you qualified to speak about that language, or be, you know, the expert speaker and kind of impart that knowledge onto others. It just does not do that.
No, I would, and as somebody who is one of those people, yeah, I would agree. And certainly when I started teaching, I knew, you know, next to nothing about my own language. I can remember going for my interview for my initial teacher training course and trying to learn the tenses, you know. So.
I have that same you know, knowledge I had, or the same aha moment, is when I think I really started looking at tenses as a teacher well into my adulthood. And I already spoke 4 languages, but I had never, because I just spoke. My approach to learning languages was very inductive. I was moved from one country to another, had the full immersion experience, learned through films, through music, through just having to speak or to learn that language within a school. And that didn't give me the expertise that I have today. I only got that at a subsequent moment when I thought, I'm going to be a teacher, so I need to know more about language than I already do. It's, you know, I have a passion for singing. People listen to me sing and they say, can you teach me to sing? I cannot, because I've studied singing, but I'm not a music teacher. That's a completely other thing. And people need to officially get with the program and realize that you are not an expert, even of your culture, your own culture. I'm an Armenian. I am illiterate in Armenian. And some people would see me as the perfect model teacher of Armenian because, you know, as my pedigree is very 100% Armenian. But that's not really the case. And I know that. And when it comes to teaching culture as well, think about, you know, you're teaching English, but culture is kind of something that goes with that language. Then I don't find myself in my zone, in my comfort zone, because I don't feel that I can teach cultures. I can teach from my own experience what I've learned about different cultures. And if I live in a certain place for long enough, I have common knowledge as other people about their customs, their festivals, but to talk about culture, I think, is an entirely different topic. Once again, which is not necessarily, I think, always tied to language studies as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to bring it to a close because we've run over the half hour, but it's so interesting, and there's some really interesting comments here as well that I would like to respond to, but we can come back to the comments. So please, if you're watching this later as well, do feel free to add comments, and I will come back and look at them later. And I guess, Meri, you might be able to as well. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Really fascinating conversation.
Really, thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for everybody who's been watching live, and indeed those who are going to catch up later. And I will put the link to the upcoming session that Meri talked about in the comments. And I will be writing a newsletter related to this discussion as well. So I'll put it in there too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.